Have you ever stopped to think why? In an era where we have instant access to all accumulated human information, where algorithms can predict our desires before we even feel them, and where artificial intelligence solves problems that have challenged our species for millennia, we feel lonelier, more misunderstood, and disconnected than ever before. This is not just a cruel irony of progress. It is the symptom of a profound crisis that is approaching like a silent storm, and by 2026 will reach proportions that will fundamentally transform how we live, love, and exist in the world. The intelligence we are losing doesn't appear in any IQ test. It is not measured by algorithms, nor quantified in data. It is the intelligence that allows us to look into another person's eyes and understand not just what they are saying, but what they are feeling behind the words. It is the ability to navigate the complex labyrinth of human emotions, to create genuine connections in a world that increasingly values superficial and performative interactions. It is the ancestral wisdom of how to be truly human in the company of other humans, a skill that our species took hundreds of thousands of years to develop, and that we are losing in a single generation. Imagine a 20-year-old young woman sitting in a coffee shop, surrounded by dozens of people, but completely absorbed by the luminous screen of her phone. She has 2,000 friends on social media, receives hundreds of likes on her photos, maintains simultaneous conversations with 15 different people through messaging apps. By digital standards, she is extremely connected and socially successful. But when she looks up and sees an older man at the next table, clearly distressed, perhaps struggling with some deep pain reflected in every line of his face, she cannot decode these emotional cues. She doesn't know how to offer a simple gesture of humanity, a smile of understanding, a kind word. His body language is a code she never learned to read, because she grew up in a world where emotions are expressed through emojis, and human connections are mediated by algorithms that filter and simplify the infinite complexity of human emotional experience. This young woman is not an isolated case. She represents an entire generation that is growing up with a radically different form of social intelligence, one that privileges digital curation of personality over emotional authenticity, speed of response over depth of reflection, amplification of one's own ego over genuine understanding of the other, and the consequences of this transformation go far beyond what we can imagine. To understand the magnitude of what we are losing, we need to go back to the origins of human emotional intelligence. For most of our history as a species, our survival depended completely on our ability to read, interpret, and respond appropriately to the emotional states of other members of our group. A hunter who could not perceive when his companion was afraid, injured, or in danger, not only put the mission at risk, but threatened the survival of the entire tribe. A mother who could not interpret the subtle signs of discomfort, hunger, or illness in her baby saw her genetic lineage come to an end. A person who could not navigate the political and emotional complexities of the social group soon found themselves isolated, exiled, or dead. For this reason, over millions of years of evolution, we developed extraordinarily sophisticated neural systems to process emotional information. Our brains became incredibly efficient machines for detecting facial microexpressions that last only fractions of a second, for interpreting almost imperceptible tonal variations in voice, for sensing the subtle energetic changes that accompany different emotional states. We learn to synchronize our heart rhythms and breathing with those around us, creating a form of communication that transcends words and allows us to literally feel what the other is feeling. This capacity for empathy and emotional connection was not just a social luxury. It was the fundamental technology that allowed us to form cohesive groups, create complex cultures, develop language, art, music, and all the other achievements that define human civilization. When two humans connect emotionally in a genuine way, something magical happens at the neurological level. Their brains begin to synchronize, creating coordinated patterns of neural activity that enable a form of collective cognition that is much more powerful than any individual mind could achieve alone. But now, for the first time in human history, we are creating a social environment that not only does not reward these emotional skills, but actively inhibits them and replaces them with artificial forms of connection that simulate intimacy without ever truly achieving it. The digital platforms that dominate our social lives were designed by engineers with a very limited understanding of human psychology and optimized for metrics that have little to do with genuine emotional well-being. They maximize screen time, number of clicks, frequency of interaction, but do not measure the quality of human connection, the depth of mutual understanding, or the degree of emotional intimacy being created. The result is a system that addicts people to forms of social validation that are simultaneously intense and empty. When you receive 100 likes on a photo, your brain releases a small but significant dose of dopamine, creating the momentary sensation of connection and social approval. But this sensation is fundamentally different from the dopamine that is released when you have a genuine and deep conversation with someone who really understands who you are. The first is quick, artificial, and quickly dissipates, leaving you hungry for more. The second is slower to build, but creates a lasting sense of satisfaction and belonging that nourishes the human soul in ways that digital interactions simply cannot replicate. The problem becomes even more complex when we consider how these changes are affecting children's brain development. The human brain continues developing until 25 years of age, and the experiences a person has during this critical period literally sculpt the neural architecture that will determine how they process emotions and relate to others for the rest of their lives. A child who grows up primarily interacting with screens and algorithms is developing fundamentally different neural patterns from a child who grows up in environments rich in direct human emotional interaction. Recent neuroscience studies show that children who spend more than 3 hours a day on digital devices present measurable differences in gray matter density in brain regions responsible for emotional processing, empathy, and impulse regulation. Their amygdalae, the brain structures that process fear and other intense emotions, show different activation patterns. making them more prone to anxiety, depression, and emotional regulation difficulties. At the same time, regions of the prefrontal cortex that are responsible for empathy and understanding others' intentions and emotions show less connectivity and reduced activation. This means that an entire generation is growing up with brains that are literally less capable of forming deep emotional connections. It's not that they don't want to connect with others. It's that they don't have the neural circuits necessary to do so effectively. It's like trying to play symphonic music with instruments that can only produce a few basic notes. The music is still possible, but the rich harmonic complexity that defines a great composition is lost forever, and the consequences have already begun to manifest in alarming ways. Rates of depression and anxiety among young adults have tripled in the last 15 years. The number of people who report having no close friends has doubled in the last decade. Marriages are lasting shorter, and when they end, it's often because partners report feeling misunderstood, unseen, or emotionally neglected by each other. We are seeing the emergence of an epidemic of loneliness that is affecting people of all ages, but is particularly severe among those who grew up in the digital age. Doctors have begun documenting something they are calling chronic emotional hunger, a condition where people feel constantly unsatisfied in their relationships, always searching for something deeper, more real, more emotionally nourishing, but unable to identify what exactly is missing or how to find it. It's like having chronic thirst, but only having access to drinks that don't really hydrate. You keep drinking, but the thirst never really goes away. I want to pause for a moment to ask you directly, do you recognize this feeling in your own life? This subtle but persistent hunger for real connection, for being truly seen and understood by another human being? Those moments when you are surrounded by people, perhaps even at a party or social gathering, but feel deeply alone because you perceive that all conversations happen on a superficial surface, touching only the safest and most performative aspects of each person's personality. I know many of us carry this feeling in silence, sometimes not even being able to name exactly what is missing. But if this feeling resonates with you, share your experience in the comments. It can be as simple as writing, "I feel this emotional hunger when." Your honesty may be exactly what another person needs to read today to realize they are not alone in this search for genuine connection. What makes this situation even more tragic is that the technology causing the problem could also, in theory, be part of the solution. We have more powerful communication tools than any previous generation in human history. We can instantly connect with any person anywhere on the planet. We can share thoughts, ideas, art, and music with an ease that our ancestors would consider literally magical. But we are using these incredible tools in ways that diminish rather than amplify our capacity for deep emotional connection. The reason for this lies in the incentive structures that govern the digital economy. Technology companies make money by maintaining our attention, and they have discovered that the most effective emotions for capturing and maintaining attention are anger, fear, envy, and outrage. Emotions like compassion, empathy, gratitude, and serenity, which are fundamental for emotional well-being and healthy social connections, are simply not as effective at generating clicks and screen time. This has created a digital environment that is constantly pushing us toward our worst emotional instincts. Recommendation algorithms amplify content that makes us angry or anxious because this type of content generates more engagement. Social networks encourage us to curate idealized versions of our lives that have little to do with our real emotional experience. Dating apps reduce the infinite complexity of human attraction and compatibility to a few photos and catchy phrases, creating a culture of romantic disposability that makes it increasingly difficult to form lasting emotional bonds. But perhaps even more concerning is how these changes are affecting our relationship with ourselves. Emotional intelligence is not just about understanding others, it is also about developing a healthy and conscious relationship with our own emotional states. It means knowing how to recognize when we are stressed, sad, angry, or anxious. It means having the skills to regulate these emotions in constructive ways instead of simply trying to escape them through digital distractions. But we now live in a culture that treats any emotional discomfort as a problem to be immediately solved rather than valuable information to be understood. When we feel lonely, instead of exploring what this loneliness might be trying to communicate about our deeper emotional needs, we immediately pick up the phone and get lost in infinite feeds of distraction. When we feel anxiety, instead of practicing breathing techniques or mindfulness that help us process this anxiety in healthy ways, we take medication or isolate ourselves in virtual worlds where we can temporarily forget our real problems. The result is a population that is becoming increasingly emotionally illiterate. People who can navigate incredibly complex digital systems, but don't know how to have a difficult conversation with a romantic partner. Individuals who can optimize marketing campaigns using sophisticated data analysis, but cannot identify when they are professionally burned out or what they need to do to restore their emotional balance. Highly educated professionals who can solve complex technical problems but feel completely lost when it comes to creating emotional intimacy in their personal relationships. And here we arrive at the core of Harari's warning about 2026. It's not that an emotional apocalypse will suddenly happen on that specific date. It's that 2026 represents the tipping point where an entire generation of people who grew up primarily in the digital age will reach full adulthood and begin forming families, careers, and the social structures that will determine the direction of our civilization for the next 50 years. Imagine a society where the majority of people struggle to form deep and lasting emotional bonds, where marriages dissolve not because of dramatic conflicts, but because of a gradual erosion of emotional intimacy, where parents love their children deeply, but don't know how to connect with them emotionally in ways that nourish them and help them develop into emotionally healthy human beings, where work colleagues collaborate efficiently on technical projects, but are unable to create the kinds of trust and mutual understanding that make work deeply satisfying and meaningful. This is not dystopian science fiction. It is the path we are clearly walking now, and the costs are already becoming visible across multiple dimensions of human life. In physical health, chronic loneliness and emotional isolation are being linked to an impressive array of medical problems, from cardiovascular disease to compromised immune systems. Studies show that loneliness has an impact on mortality equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. People who feel chronically disconnected have significantly higher rates of depression, anxiety, early dementia, and even cancer. In the sphere of relationships, we are seeing concerning patterns of instability and dissatisfaction. Divorce rates remain high, but even more significant is the growing number of people who simply avoid serious relationships, entirely because they don't trust their ability to sustain them emotionally. Dating apps have created a culture where the next option is always just a swipe away, making it increasingly difficult to invest in the patience and emotional work necessary to build real intimacy over time. And perhaps most alarming, we are seeing these trends amplify in the next generation. Young children who have had access to tablets and smartphones from early infancy are showing significant delays in developing basic social skills. They struggle to make eye contact, have difficulty interpreting facial expressions, and often prefer interacting with digital characters instead of real people. Teachers report that it is increasingly difficult to maintain children's attention on activities that require patience, concentration, and collaborative social interaction. Pediatricians are documenting a dramatic increase in mental health problems among children, including anxiety, depression, sleep disorders, and emotional regulation difficulties. Even more concerning, many of these children seem to have lost the natural ability to play creatively and imaginatively. When left alone, without digital devices, they often become restless, bored, and unable to entertain or calm themselves without constant external stimulation. But before we despair completely with this dark diagnosis, it is important to remember that recognizing a problem is always the first step to solving it. And while the challenges are real and urgent, we also have unprecedented understanding of how the human mind works, how emotions operate, and how healthy social connections can be cultivated and maintained even in a digital world. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new neural connections and modify existing patterns throughout life, means that even adults who grew up with emotional intelligence deficits can learn and develop these skills. The human brain maintains its capacity for change and growth until very late in life, which means it is never too late to begin cultivating deeper and more satisfying forms of emotional connection. Some of the most effective interventions are surprisingly simple, but require conscious intention and consistent practice. Contemplative practices like mindfulness meditation teach people to develop a more conscious and balanced relationship with their own emotional states. Instead of automatically reacting to stress, anxiety, or sadness, they learn to observe these emotions with curiosity and compassion, creating space for wiser and more constructive responses. Non-violent communication exercises help people express their needs and feelings in ways that create connection instead of conflict. Simple techniques like reflecting back what we hear before responding, asking open questions that invite vulnerability, and sharing our own feelings authentically can transform superficial relationships into deeply satisfying connections. Gratitude practices, when done consistently, literally reconfigure the brain to perceive and focus on the positive aspects of human experience. People who spend a few minutes daily consciously appreciating the connections and positive experiences in their lives develop greater emotional resilience and feel more connected to others. Even more important, we need to begin creating spaces and cultures that actively cultivate and reward emotional intelligence. This means designing digital environments that prioritize quality of connection over quantity of engagement. It means creating physical spaces where people can meet face to face without the constant distraction of devices. It means teaching emotional skills in schools with the same rigor that we teach mathematics and science. Some visionary companies are already beginning to recognize that employees with high emotional intelligence are more creative, more collaborative, more resilient to stress, and more capable of leading effective teams. They are investing in training programs that teach skills like empathetic listening, conscious communication, and constructive conflict resolution. In the sphere of education, progressive schools are integrating social emotional learning into the core curriculum, teaching children to identify and express their emotions in healthy ways, to develop empathy for others, and to form positive relationships. These skills are not educational luxuries. They are fundamental competencies that will determine these children's ability to thrive in any area of life. But perhaps the most important change needs to happen at the individual level. Each of us needs to make the conscious decision to prioritize the development of our own emotional intelligence and to create relationships based on emotional authenticity instead of digital convenience. This means being willing to have difficult conversations, to share real vulnerabilities, to dedicate time and attention to truly knowing the people in our lives. It means establishing healthy boundaries with technology, creating sacred spaces in our lives where we can exist without the constant distraction of notifications and digital feeds. It can be as simple as having meals without phones, walks without podcasts, or conversations without checking messages every 5 minutes. It means practicing the lost art of simply being present with another human being, of listening not just to respond, but to truly understand, of asking questions that go beyond the superficial and invite genuine revelation of who the person really is behind the social masks we all wear. And perhaps most crucially, it means developing a more compassionate and conscious relationship with ourselves, learning to perceive our own emotional patterns without judgment, understanding which situations make us stressed or anxious, and developing healthy strategies to deal with these emotions. Recognizing our deep emotional needs and finding authentic ways to satisfy them. The truth is that emotional intelligence has always been one of the most valuable skills a human being can possess, but we now live at a historical moment where it has become even more critical. In a world where artificial intelligence can perform many of the cognitive tasks that were once exclusively human, our capacity for genuine emotional connection becomes our most distinctive competitive advantage. Machines can process data, recognize patterns, and even simulate conversations, but they cannot offer the kind of empathetic understanding, emotional support, and authentic intimacy that human beings need to thrive. As more aspects of our lives become automated and digitized, our hunger for real human connection will only grow. This means that people who develop high emotional intelligence will not only have richer and more satisfying personal lives, but also significant professional advantages. They will be the leaders who inspire genuine loyalty, the therapists, teachers, and counselors who really make a difference in people's lives, the romantic partners who create relationships that last decades, the parents who raise emotionally healthy and resilient children. But beyond personal benefits, there is a civilizational dimension to this issue that we cannot ignore. Democracy only works when citizens are able to understand and empathize with perspectives different from their own. Global cooperation on issues like climate change and economic inequality requires the ability to transcend narrow interests and think about the collective welfare of humanity. If an entire generation grows up with emotional intelligence deficits, unable to form deep connections with people different from themselves, the implications for social and political stability are profound. We are already seeing signs of this in the extreme polarization that characterizes public discourse in many developed democracies. People are increasingly unable to have constructive conversations with those who have different political opinions, and increasingly prone to demonize and dehumanize those they see as adversaries. The ability to maintain healthy emotional relationships across differences of opinion, to find shared humanity even amid conflict, to build bridges of understanding instead of walls of division, these are skills that our democracy and our civilization simply cannot survive without. This is why, when Harari warns about the costs of lack of emotional intelligence in 2026, he is not just talking about individual relationships or personal mental health, although these are crucial issues. He is warning about a fundamental threat to our ability to function as a cohesive and cooperative society. He is pointing to a crisis that may determine whether the next generation will build a more connected and compassionate world, or fragment into isolated tribes, each unable to understand or genuinely care about the others. The good news is that we still have time to change course. Emotional intelligence is not a mysterious gift that some people are born with and others are not. It is a set of skills that can be learned, practiced, and developed by anyone willing to invest the necessary time and attention. And unlike many other skills, emotional intelligence becomes more valuable when it is shared. When one person in a relationship, family, or community develops greater capacity for emotional connection, it elevates the quality of all relationships in that system. If these reflections touched something you have been feeling, but perhaps have not found words to express, know that you are not alone. By subscribing to the channel, you will connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for a deeper understanding of the challenges we face as human beings in an era of accelerated technological transformation. Each week, we meet here to explore together the great questions that define our time and to seek not just understanding, but also practical paths to live with more wisdom, connection, and purpose in a world that often leaves us disoriented. This is not just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth for people who refuse to accept superficiality as the inevitable destiny of human experience. The future of our emotional intelligence, and with it, the future of our relationships, our health, and our inner peace, is not something that simply happens to us. It is something we create through the choices we make each day, each interaction, each moment we decide to be truly present with another human being. In 2026, we will look back and see this moment as the turning point when a generation decided to reclaim the art of being deeply human in the company of other humans, or as the moment when we lost something precious forever. The choice, as always, is ours.
Thank you, Natalia. Thank you, Alec. Thank you, Studio B. Thank you, everyone at the Berggruen Institute. And most importantly, thank you, Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Yuval Harari. Frankly, they don't need an introduction. I think you know who Joseph is. He is, in some ways, one of yours, meaning he is LA, Hollywood. He is he's behind and in front of the camera, and he's been engaged intellectually on the issues that we care about at the Institute. One of those issues is who are we becoming? Who do we want to be, humans, in an age where we can, in theory, change our own nature, transform ourselves through gene editing, AI, quantum computing. And no one has maybe put this into perspective like Yuval Harari. And Yuval wrote a new book, Nexus, which is powerful and, frankly, incredibly timely, because his vision, I think, has been that we've created our lives, our civilizations, from narratives. And we humans have really driven those narratives. But now with AI, it could be that the narrative is driven beyond us, even though in theory it came from us. So we could lose control if we ever had it, but we could really lose the narrative that we are potentially unleashing. So let's hear about it tonight, and thank you again.
Hey everybody, what's going on? Did that feel like a movie moment or what? Is that? Jesus. All right. I'm really, really excited to be here. Thank you to Nicholas and everyone at the Gruen Institute, Studio B. I am an enormous fan of this man's writing here, Mr. Yuval Harari. Ladies and gentlemen, can we hear it for him? He's written a new book called Nexus. I want to talk to you about that tonight, of course. Now, you're on a book tour. I'm sure you're talking about this book a lot and maybe saying some of the same things over and over again. I've never experienced that before myself, having to say the same things over and over again, promoting a piece of media. Watch Killer Heat, released on Amazon today. Prime Video. So I'm going to try to come at this conversation and let you say some of the things you want to say to everybody, but also maybe come at it from a perspective that's unique to this time and place. We're here in Los Angeles, which is sort of the epicenter of the film and television industry. I've worked in film and television my entire life. And a lot of your book is about storytelling. I love to consider myself a storyteller. As an actor and a filmmaker, it's something that I think of as more than a job. I connect to it on maybe an existential level, on who I am. And one thing I often like to say even is that storytelling is a big part of what makes humans human. So one of the first things I wanted to ask you, you wrote a book about humans called Sapiens. How many people have read Sapiens here? Yeah. So as an expert on the history and the prehistory of what humans are, I'm curious to hear what you think of that statement. If I say storytelling is a big part of what makes humans human, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Yes.
this is this is the source of our power. We control the world because we can cooperate in much larger numbers than any other animal. And the secret of cooperation of humans is stories. I mean, you can't get to know more than 100 or 200 individuals, but the same story can be known to millions and even billions of people. And as long as everybody believes the same story, they can cooperate. They can agree on norms and values and so forth. And maybe to just throw, just give one or two examples. If you think about the most famous face in history, the most famous portrait in history. So this is the face of Jesus. That over 2,000 years, more portraits of Jesus have been created than probably of any other person in history. And they are everywhere. In churches, in cathedrals, in houses, in schools, in government ministries, at least in some countries. And 100% of these portraits are fictional. Not a single one is authentic, because nobody has any idea how Jesus actually looked like. There is not a single portrait or statue made during his lifetime that has survived. The earliest portrait we have is from about 200 years after his death, and it shows a man crucified on a cross with the head of a donkey, because it was a graffiti drawn by anti-Christians who made fun of this new strange cult. In the Bible itself, there is not a single word about how the man looked like. There is one description of his clothes, but nothing about him, whether he was tall or short or thin or fat or black hair or bald or blonde, nothing. Everything is just fictions. And yet, these fictions have enabled billions of people to work together, whether for good purposes, like charities and building hospitals and whatever, or whether for fighting holy wars and launching inquisitions. But it all runs on stories. And religion is an easy example, but perhaps the most important or successful example is money.
You're saying that money is a story.
It's just like, what else can it be? I mean, it has no objective value. You can't eat or drink dollars. The most successful storytellers in the world are not the people who win the Nobel Prize in literature. It's the people who win the Nobel Prize in economics. And one last thought, if you think about the United States today, maybe the last story that still holds this place together is the dollar. It's the only thing that Republicans and Democrats can still agree on is the value of a dollar. Everything else is like they have very different views.
So this gets at one of the things I found fascinating in the book, that you define stories not only by the content of that story, but the network of people that are connected by that story. You mentioned Republicans and Democrats, you mentioned Christians. Every story, especially any story of any popularity, it defines a certain network. Can you say more? Because that was a new concept to me.
Again, I mean, the way that Nexus tries to understand history is not the history of religions, cultures, wars, kings, but how information flows in the world and the networks of information that create the world. So to give one example, we tend to think about democracy and dictatorship as two contrasting types of ethical systems, of political systems. They have different ideals, different values, and which is true, but you can, on a more fundamental level, you can look at them as different information networks. Information simply flows differently in a dictatorship and in a democracy. A dictatorship is a network in which all the information flows to one hub, where all the decisions are being made. Whereas democracy is a system in which information, if dictatorship is a centralized information system, democracy is a distributed or decentralized system. Well, yes, some information flows to the center, let's say to Washington, where some decisions are being made, but most decisions are made elsewhere. Like if you look at the United States over the last century, so a lot of extremely important decisions were made here in Hollywood. And the influence of the people in Washington on what's happening in Hollywood, it's an open debate. Who influenced more whom? Was it Washington influencing Hollywood or vice versa? In the Soviet Union, there is no debate. I mean, the people in the center tell, Stalin is telling Eisenstein what to film. There is no debate. You do the wrong thing, you go to the gulag. Even if you do the right thing, you might go to the gulag. So that's the difference in how information flows. between democracies and dictatorships, and I guess we'll get to that, but one of the biggest questions about AI is what will it do to these contrasting types of information flows, because in the 20th century, the US defeated the USSR ultimately because centralized information processing was inefficient. When all information about everything, economics, culture, the film industry, producing cars, all the information flowed to Moscow, and there are some bureaucrats needed to make decisions, they couldn't do it. They were overwhelmed by the amount of information and either made no decisions or bad decisions. Whereas the distributed system of the United States, it functioned much more efficiently. But what happens if you replace humans with AIs? Humans are overwhelmed by too much information. AIs become more efficient when you flood them with information. Again, it's an open debate. We still don't know the answer, but there is at least one school of thought that argues that AI will make centralized information systems more efficient, and the main problem of totalitarian and centralized system in the 20th century will become their big advantage, which we even see to some extent in the economic realm, that these huge high-tech monopolies that just monopolize entire sections of the economy, because size matters when you have this kind of technology.
Yeah. I want to get to AI. This is something I'm deeply fascinated with. I know a lot of you are too. I also want to get to what you just said about whether Hollywood or Washington is making more decisions, because we love to think that we're important here in Hollywood.
You are.
Before we do, I just want to cover one of the pieces of vocabulary that I found the most useful in your book that I want to go back to a few times as we talk tonight. And again, I think this is sort of empowering and flattering if you're a storyteller. You say in the book that stories can even create a new level of reality. And you talk about 3 different versions of reality, if you will. Objective reality, subjective reality, and intersubjective reality. Can you explain what you mean by those terms?
Yeah, so objective reality is things that exist whether you believe in them or not, whether you know about them or not. If an asteroid from outer space is now coming towards us, about to hit Earth and destroy human civilization, it exists whether people know about it or not. And similarly, viruses killed people, billions of people, long before anybody knew viruses exist. It doesn't matter if you believe in them or not, they can kill you. This is objective reality. Then you have subjective reality, which is reality in the mind of a single person. It depends on the consciousness, on the awareness of a single person. So if you feel pain, nobody else in the world feels this pain. Your doctor, your family can tell you, oh, there is nothing wrong with you. But if you feel the pain, it's still there. This is subjective reality. Now, intersubjective reality, this is something that didn't exist for, as far as we know, for most of the history of the universe. There were only objective and subjective realities. That's it. And stories were important for the appearance in the last few tens of thousands of years, at least in our species, of a new type of reality, intersubjective reality. Things that exist in the interaction between many consciousnesses, between many minds, that they often exist on the level of story, and we already mentioned some of them. Money is maybe the most important type of intersubjective reality. It's not objective. A dollar has no objective value in the sense that you can eat it or drink it or make something out of it. If you're a billionaire and you fly in your private jet with, I don't know, $1 billion, and you crash on a deserted island inhabited only by, I don't know, monkeys and rats and whatever, your dollars are worthless. You cannot buy anything from the monkeys. You cannot make them build a raft for you. You still have maybe the papers, or you can show them on your smartphone to the monkeys. Look, I have $1 billion in my bank account. Just build this raft or give me these bananas. I'll give you as much as you want. It won't help. They are simply unaware of the existence of this reality. Now, if you crash on a lonely island with a cargo of bananas, you can eat them. If you crash with a cargo of, I don't know, hammers, you can use them to try and build a raft. But the most worthless thing to crash on a lonely island with is money. There's nothing to do with it. But if you have other people there and they believe the same story as you, it works. But again, it's fragile. Intersubjective realities are fragile because people can lose faith in it. Again, it happens to gods, that some gods were once the most powerful intersubjective realities in the world, and now nobody believes in them, and they are gone. And the same thing happens to money. And it's, going back, say, to the dollar, it's now interesting to see what might happen if some people lose faith in this intersubjective reality and instead put their faith in another one like the Bitcoin. So the same way that we had wars of religion in previous eras, now we might have, just imagine trying to run a society when different people just reject the money of the other group. No, ours is better.
So one of the most powerful tools to create an intersubjective reality in our time is film and television. And again, here we are in LA. Lots of us work making film and television. I'm curious just to dive in a little bit. You don't talk about Hollywood, film, and TV too much in your book, but because we're here, I'm curious to just ask you about it. We're also, by the way, here at the house where the horse head scene was shot from The Godfather, which, come on, yeah, The Godfather. I'm curious to hear from you, from a historical perspective, how did film and TV change storytelling compared to the technologies that existed before film and TV, do you think?
So film and TV are, of course, not alone. They are part of the package of modern information technology. And the changes were enormous. Again, going back to one salient example, if you think about the history of democracy, so for most of history, large-scale democracies were simply impossible. There was no way to create a large-scale democracy because democracy is a conversation. And in a Stone Age tribe, you want to have a conversation between all tribe members. It's relatively easy. They can all come together and talk. But as human societies became bigger and bigger, it became more and more difficult to bring everybody together to the town square or to the same place to have a conversation. So we don't know of any large-scale democracy in ancient times. All the examples, like Athens or Rome, or city-states, or even smaller tribes and towns. We begin to see large-scale democracies only in the late modern era with the rise of modern information technologies. First, the newspaper, and then telegraph and radio and television and film, and finally the internet. This is when you begin to see large-scale democracies because you can use these technologies to create a conversation in real time between millions of people. People spread over entire continents and they all watch the same news on television, the same TV series, the same movie at the same time, so they can connect in a way that was just impossible before. And this was the foundation of modern large-scale democracy. And again, we'll get to that later, but the new information technologies of the present era, like social media and AI, they are destabilizing democracy for this reason, because democracy is built on top of information technology, so it's not hard to see why a major change in information technology will create an earthquake in the structure built on top of it, which is democracy. But the last thing I'll say is that every technology has many different usages. Also, modern totalitarian regimes are built on the same technology. There were no totalitarian regimes in the ancient world, large-scale totalitarian regimes. Totalitarian regimes are regimes that try to control everybody all the time, everything you do. In the ancient world, you have many monarchies and autocracies, but most of the time, you know, the emperor in Rome, he collects taxes and he directs the armies, but he doesn't try to manage the life of every individual in every village on a day-to-day basis, because this is simply impossible. You begin to see it at the same large-scale totalitarianism at the same time as large-scale democracy, because it relies on the same technology. I mean, the Soviets, for instance, I mean, at the same time that Hollywood is established,
right.
You also see the flowering of the Soviet film industry, and the Soviets were masters, at least in the beginning, of the art of filmmaking.
Eisenstein.
Yeah. And they use the same technology to create a totalitarian regime that everybody from, you know, the Pacific Ocean to the Baltic Sea would watch the same movies, and all the movies are giving the same narrative, the same messages directed from the center.
The Nazis were also brilliant filmmakers.
Exactly.
Leni Riefenstahl, and yeah. You were touching on it, but that's the next place I wanted to go is, okay, so if film and television changed the intersubjective realities and changed the way that networks can form, let's move to the dominant media technology for the last couple decades, because sadly enough, that's not film and TV. Not that film and TV did such a great job, but the dominant technology now has been social media. So I'm curious to ask you the same question that I asked about film and TV. With the rise of social media, how did that change what networks could form, what intersubjective realities could be created, and how humans behaved and thought?
Well, it had immense impact. I mean, just think about the numbers. You have billions of people spending hours every day on this. It is bound to have a tremendous impact. And it creates new ways to form networks, to organize people, which again has a profound impact on society. And it had positive influence and also negative influence. I'll talk a little about the positive influence. I tend to talk a lot about the negativities, but maybe start with the positive influence of social media. The example I like best is from my own personal life. I met my husband, Itzik, 22 years ago in one of the first social media websites for gay people in Israel. And the thing about, for instance, social media in the gay community is that over history you have two types of minorities. You have, again, in terms of information networks, you have concentrated minorities and you have dispersed minorities. So Jews, for instance, are a concentrated minority. Even if they say in a particular country of just 1% of the population, they are concentrated in particular communities, neighborhoods. So usually a Jewish boy would be born into a Jewish family in a Jewish neighborhood. So finding other Jews isn't a problem. You're surrounded by them, even though you're just 1% of the population.
As a native Angelino, I can confirm that this is true.
But a gay boy is usually not born into a gay family in a gay neighborhood. And being born gay in Israel in the 1970s and growing up in the 1980s and 1990s in what was a very homophobic society, like the first issue is, how do you find anybody else? I mean, I didn't know anybody who was out, certainly not in my town. I saw, again, this goes back to film and television, like the first time I saw gay people was on the screen.
What show was it, or movie, do you remember?
There was this British series, Are You Being Served? With, what's his name?
I don't know it. Wow.
Really?
Okay. Yeah, no.
Mr. Humphreys. So, there was one film that I saw later in the 90s, Lilies, by a Canadian director, I think.
What's it called?
Lilies.
Lilies.
It wasn't very famous, but he had a tremendous impact on my life.
Great, yeah.
Like, I remember going to see this movie and coming out of the movie theater and telling myself, you're gay.
Wow.
This was really, it had a huge impact on my life. But you know, you see a gay person on television, you can't reach out to them. And you don't know who else in my town now sees the same movie or the same series and feels the same as me. It's only one directional. But then social media, the internet came, and social media came, and you can interact suddenly through the screen. So what was kind of maybe the biggest hurdle ever? How do you find the others? Suddenly becomes very, very easy.
All right, that's the positive side.
That's the positive side.
But
there are also negativities. I mean, as you may have noticed, we now have the most sophisticated information technology in history, and we can't talk to each other anymore. And certainly we can't listen to each other. I said earlier that democracy is a conversation, and the conversation is breaking down all over the world. I mean, every country has its own special explanations why Republicans and Democrats can't hold a reasoned conversation anymore. And you have all these explanations about American history and society and whatever. But then you go to Brazil, it's the same thing. You go to Israel, it's the same thing. I even was in Canada 2 weeks ago. I thought this was the same place. They told me, no, it's the same in Canada. And what's happening? And it's not like the ideological divides today are much worse than they were, let's say, in the 60s. The ideological divides in the 60s were actually much bigger. The issues like the civil rights movement, the sexual revolution, the Vietnam War, the Cold War, even the violence, at least up till now, was much worse in terms of assassinations and riots and so forth. But nevertheless, people could still hold a conversation, agree on some basic facts like who won the last elections, and have bipartisan laws. So why is it breaking down all over the world? And the best answer so far that we know about is social media. Again, this basic information technology underlying the whole structure, it's now creating an earthquake. And the mechanism by now is quite well understood. I mean, 10 years ago, it was not well understood, unfortunately. Now we know what's wrong. We still fail to fix it, but at least we know what's wrong. And this is very important because this is kind of the first major impact of AI on history. Because social media is managed not by human beings, it's managed by algorithms, AIs. And again, this is very interesting because one of the first jobs which was automated was not taxi drivers, and it was not textile workers, it was media editors, news editors. You know, in the 19th and 20th century, being an editor of a major media or news organization was an immensely powerful position. You shaped the conversation. You decided what people would be talking about. Some of the most powerful figures in modern history, they began as editors. Lenin's only job before he became Soviet dictator was editor of the newspaper Iskra.
I did not know that. That's funny.
Benito Mussolini was a journalist. Then he was editor of Avanti, I think was the name of the newspaper. And then he was promoted from editor of Avanti to dictator of Italy.
Mussolini and Lenin both?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's fascinating.
You know, if you look at the French Revolution, Jean-Paul Marat shaped the French Revolution by editing the major newspaper of Paris in those days, L'Ami des Peuples, the friend of the people. And now this job has been given to algorithms. Who is the editor of the Facebook newsfeed? Who is the editor of TikTok? Who is the editor of Twitter? An algorithm, a non-human intelligence. And these AIs, these algorithms, they were given by their human masters Seemingly benign task, goal, increase user engagement. Engagement, sounds good to be engaged, no? And the reason was obvious. I mean, business model. The more time people are engaged on TikTok or Facebook or Twitter, the more time they spend on the platform, the more they share and so forth, the more advertisements you can show them, and the more data you can collect about them and sell it to a third party or use it to produce even more powerful algorithms and AIs. So the business model of most social media try to keep people glued to the screen as much as possible. And this was the task given to the editors of these places. Increase user engagement. And the algorithms experimented on millions, actually billions of human guinea pigs, and they made a discovery, which was actually also made by philosophers and politicians thousands of years ago, but now the AIs discovered it also, that the easiest way to increase user engagement is outrage, or greed, or fear, or hate. If you press the greed button, or the hate button, or the fear button in a human's mind, you grab their attention. You get them glued to the screen. And this is what they did. They flooded the information market with more and more outrage and greed and fear, with fake news and conspiracy theories, and the conversation broke down. And this was very, very primitive AIs. This was like, long before ChatGPT, which is also quite primitive compared to what's coming. But even this, when people talk about, this kind of future fears about AIs, it's not in the future, it's already in the past. If you look at the impact of these very primitive AIs on democracies all over the world, on societies all over the world, it's not too early to worry about the impact of AI. It's too late in many ways.
One thing I would just compliment what you're saying with is that it is true that the algorithms, as you put it, sort of discovered that the best way to maximize engagement was outrage, fear, extremism, etc. What's harder to describe with language is the algorithm doesn't know that exactly. I don't think.
No, they are not conscious, not at all.
The algorithm is not like a person saying, there's greed, there's hate, I know, I'll put more hate and greed in the feed. It's not like that. It's just a cold and dumb pattern matching calculation.
It's cold and smart. No.
Okay, fair enough. Well, that's a fair segue. Cold and dumb to cold and smart. We've talked about film and TV. Now we've talked about social media. Now I want to talk about what's coming next. We all, I think, are kind of aware we're at the very beginning of some very big changes that are coming fast and furious our way because of the rapidly emerging technology known as AI. I want to, through the same, your book, you say so many different things about AI, and I want to just narrow it down to, again, because we're kind of coming at this conversation through the lens of storytelling, to start there. How do you think AI will change storytelling from what it used to be?
Well, as we said earlier, stories are some of the most powerful technologies in history. Whether it's the story of Jesus or whether it's the story of money, this is really the foundation of human civilization, is stories. Everything else is built on top of it. And for tens of thousands of years, the only entities on this planet that could create stories, either create new stories or elaborate and interpret old stories, were human beings. Only the human mind was capable of doing it. And now we have on this planet another entity which is capable of spreading and interpreting and ultimately creating stories. It's not conscious, at least not yet, at least as far as we know. We at least my position is you don't need consciousness to do these things. You need intelligence. Intelligence and consciousness are different things. Intelligence is the ability to attain goals, to solve problems. Consciousness is the ability to feel things, pain and pleasure, love and hate. We tend to confuse them because in humans and also in other mammals and animals, consciousness and intelligence go together. We solve problems through our feelings. But AI and computers, they are very different. As far as we know, they have no consciousness, they don't feel anything, but they are highly intelligent, at least in some fields. And again, if you think about storytelling, so now the ability of AIs to compose stories, to write texts, and create images, and create music, is really astounding. You know, people say, yes, it's still not as good as the best humans, but it's already better than many humans, or people would say than the average human even. And it's only the beginning, it's nothing, it's just 10 years since the AI revolution began. We haven't seen anything yet. And when I read, for instance, a story composed by AI, what strikes me the most, you can say, oh, it's not good because of this or that, it lacks this, but it's really a story. It's held together by some coherent ideas, motifs. It's not just some kind of glorified autocomplete that it just strings words together randomly, or it takes bits and pieces of sentences from here and there and put them together. No, there is actually a logic to the story. So even if it's not as good as the best human storytellers in 2024, what will it be in 2034 or 44? And again, stories are not just mythological stories, or poems, or theater plays, or movies. Money is also a story. So these things are going to create new financial devices also. Finance is one of the most creative things of all. If you think about human creativity, so think money, checks, ETFs, CDOs, all these things, extremely creative. And they are increasingly we are going to see new financial devices created by a non-human intelligence. And for tens of thousands of years, we lived cocooned inside a human culture. Like our lives are shaped by all these stories and artifacts that other humans created. Again, from the holy books, the Bible and the Quran and the Vedas, to the songs and the music and the theater and the movies and the artifacts, the chair, the shoes, everything. This cultural cocoon made by humans. What does it mean? Before we get to the question, is it good, is it bad, is it dangerous? Just leave aside for a moment the judgment. Just think about what would it mean for human beings to live inside a world woven to a large extent by an alien intelligence. Alien not in the sense that it's coming from outer space. Alien in the sense that it creates in a very different way than the human mind. And this, I think, is the biggest question that we are facing, certainly in Hollywood, kind of the center, the epicenter of human storytelling, but all over the world.
So here is probably the only thing in the book that I don't think I agree with exactly.
That's
and so,
good.
Yeah, so I would love to hash this out with you a bit.
Yeah.
Describing AI as alien intelligence. Clearly, you're not talking about an alien from outer space. I understand, but you also in the book even do use the word God. You say perhaps this is these are entities that could be seen as some kind of new gods. Mm-hmm. So I tend to feel like describing this technology in terms like alien, God, the personification or the deification of these computer systems, I'm worried that story could do more harm than good. And I have some reasons why, but before I get to them, I would just want to start by asking, so you very decisively decided in your book to describe this technology in these terms, alien, God. Tell me about your thought process. Why did you decide to describe the technology in those terms?
I mean, it's basically a PR strategy. How do you present it to the public? And yes, I mean, it demands a lot of thought. Is it a good PR strategy or not in terms of the results? And one reason I chose to go in the alien direction is because I see too much of the discussion gets bogged down in the idea that AI is trying to reach human-level intelligence. And that the very definition, what is AI? It's the moment when computers are somehow equivalent to humans. And I think this is completely misleading.
I very much agree with that.
AI is not progressing towards human-level intelligence, just as airplanes are not trying to reach bird-level flight.
Yeah.
They are just doing their own thing, which is completely different from birds. And that's also what I think about computers and AIs. They are doing their own intelligent thing, which is completely different from the human intelligence. And this is one reason that I chose the kind of term alien to describe it.
I think that's a great reason. I also find it counterproductive when AI is described in these kinds of terms. Is it approaching human-level intelligence? They throw around this term AGI, artificial general intelligence, and they define it quickly as once it approaches human-level intelligence. I agree. I don't think that's helpful either. I'll tell you one of the reasons why I am concerned with describing this technology and sort of personifying it or deifying it, and that is a little bit about how the tech actually works and is built. I'm obviously not an engineer, but I've learned enough about this. The way that these models are built is they take enormous sets of data. They input that data into an algorithm, a sort of a black box that they frankly don't even totally understand, and it spits out outputs of value. Now, where did all that data come from that was input into the model? It came from humans. Humans generated that data. So my concern about describing it as alien or godlike is it feels distinct from, separate from humans. It feels like it helps to hide the reality of how these models really work. Because, by the way, I think a lot of these tech companies, maybe not all of them, CEO of Stability is in the house and they're working on, what are they called? Sanitized data sets, which I really appreciate, actually getting the licenses of the data sets that they're using to train these models. But I think a lot of these labs, they're not doing that. What they're doing is stealing a bunch of data from people who deserve the right to, I think, own the data that they created. And they're not disclosing what data went into these models. When they are asked, they won't say. They're getting sued left and right because of this. To me, this is a really central problem that we absolutely need to solve as soon as possible for a lot of reasons that I want to get into. One of those problems is economic. We in the film and television industry are going to feel it maybe first. But I don't think it's limited to Hollywood. I think so many industries, whether it's doctors or architects, designers, logistics operators, anybody who's working at a computer, and once there's robots, really anybody that's doing almost any work is going to have their livelihood threatened. And these tech companies are going to try to say, oh, well, we invented a god. It can just do your job. When in reality, what they did was they stole everybody's data, crunched up the numbers, and generated those outputs. Without the human-generated data, their products are 100% useless, have no value at all. And so one of my concerns with describing this technology in terms of gods or aliens or anything that sort of personifies it or turns it into a creature, a thing on its own that exists independently of the human input that made it, is that it helps these tech companies hide where their products really come from. And where they really came from is humans. Okay.
So I agree. I mean, I think that the main issue is whether we focus on the input or on the output. I completely agree with what you describe. I think about it that, AI is basically eating the whole of human culture that we've produced over tens of thousands of years, from the cave paintings of tens of thousands of years ago to the movies of today. We've produced this enormous amount of cultural artifacts and habits, and now AI comes and eats it within just a few months or years. And I think you're also absolutely correct that the business model of many of these companies is based on kind of this trick that convincing everybody that information works differently from everything else in the universe. And I think this goes back to Shoshana Zuboff's very insightful book, Surveillance Capitalism.
Yeah.
Where she explains that, for thousands of years, people had this basic principle, don't steal. And then the tech companies come and says, yes, don't steal, but it doesn't apply to information. That's different. That's a different realm that all these things about, no, it's not stealing. And again, the reaction should be, why is so different with information? And here I completely agree that I'll think about it more, that using this kind of terminology of making it very alien is actually helping this way of presenting things. When I think about the kind of alien nature of the technology, I think mainly about the output, because it ate all these kind of familiar things, but it then starts to create things which are different, at least in some ways, from everything that was put into it. And this idea that AI is just, glorified copy-paste, that it takes texts or images or music and just takes something from here and something from there and puts it together and, it's something new. And no, it's really more than that. I mean, to some extent, this is also what humans do. And I think about my line of work of writing books. So I do the same thing. I read all these previous books and articles and I talk with people and then I take something from here and something from there and put it together and here is a new book. And it's the same with music. I mean, nobody starts from nothing. Everybody, every musician listens to previous works of art and adds something, but without the previous input, nobody could do it.
It's true. That is true. Finish your thought, but I want to respond to that.
So, and I think that it's crucial to understand what we are facing in the AI revolution, that my fear of humanizing it too much is that then the kind of underestimate the challenge. That we think, it can only cut and paste together our creations. It won't really be something completely new. No, it can create really, again, from finance to religions, it can create completely new things, which could be good, could be bad, but we will have to deal with living in a really radically different reality.
I do agree with that, and we shouldn't underestimate the challenge. One thing I wanted to respond to is, first of all, I agree with you that creativity is always an amalgamation of your influences. Shakespeare wasn't the first one to write Romeo and Juliet, and the Judy Garland Wizard of Oz is actually not the first Wizard of Oz, et cetera, et cetera. I'm a big fan. The creative community that I founded, Hit Record, was all about remix and people building on each other's work, and let's privilege honesty over originality because we're all original human beings. But that's just it, I think. We're all original human beings. I think to apply that same way of thinking to a computer system is predicated on personifying the AI. And I think this is going to be a central question we confront as we go forward is, do we want to afford moral standing and legal standing to these computer systems? There are going to be people who argue we should, especially because very soon, a lot of folks are going to be in love with these computer systems. There's already lots of people who are spending hours and hours and hours a day talking to and interacting with their AI best friends, their AI lovers, etc. That's only going to get way more sophisticated.
Absolutely.
And I think those folks, and I'm not excluding myself. Who knows? I mean, I don't mean to other them. I think it's going to be very, very common. We're all going to get really emotionally attached to these AI characters that we interact with. And I think it's going to feel very natural to start talking about AI rights, comparing it to civil rights. And I'm quite concerned that if we go down that road, it could be very perilous. That affordance of those rights could go hand in hand with some of the worst dystopian outcomes that you describe in your book.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think one of the major things about AIs that we will see is that it will be able to create intimate relationships with human beings.
Yes.
I don't necessarily mean sexual, could be also sexual, but intimate
Oh, it'll be
relationships.
sexual. That's one, not all it'll be, but...
Yeah, some. And it's very close. It's already beginning to happen. It will be a major issue in societies all over the world. Whether, we don't, philosophically, there is no way to prove that anyone is a conscious entity.
Mm-hmm.
And personhood and legal rights ultimately depend on whether an entity is conscious. Consciousness also is the capacity to suffer.
Mm-hmm.
And rights are linked to the capacity to suffer. So if you think about, animal rights, so the big issue is if they can suffer, so they can suffer pain or loneliness or distress, so maybe they don't deserve the same rights as humans, but there at least is an ethical debate to be there. Whereas there is no debate about the rights of chairs, like if I throw this chair into a fire. So again, it could be a crime against the human owner of the chair, but not against the chair, because the chair can't suffer. Now, we don't have any proof that anybody has consciousness, has this capacity to suffer. And we've known it for thousands of years. So granting rights is really a matter of social convention. That society agrees that all humans are conscious beings. And society agrees that dogs, because we have attachment to them, they should have rights, but cows and pigs shouldn't.
An intersubjective reality.
Exactly. And as humans become attached to AIs and develop relationships with them, it will be a major issue. And there'll be huge pressures to recognize them as persons. And maybe one also of even geopolitical divides in the world could be between countries that recognize AIs as persons with rights and countries that don't. And arguments today about different attitude to human rights would be dwarfed by this. And interestingly enough, if you think, what is the country which is closest to recognizing AIs as persons? It's the United States. Because the legal path is wide open. In the US, it's one of the countries in the world where the legal path to recognizing AIs as persons is open. And this is because corporations are recognized by US law as persons which even have rights like freedom of speech in Citizen United against, what was it, in 2010. Now, until today, the idea that corporations are persons with rights was a legal fiction, because every decision of the corporation ultimately had to be made by some human executive or lawyer or accountant. Like Google is a legal person in the United States, but every decision of Google has to be made by a human being. Now, think what happens if you incorporate an AI. According to US law, today you don't need any new laws. All the laws are in the books already. According to US law, you can incorporate an AI and it's now a legal person with rights like freedom of speech. But unlike Google, this AI can actually make decisions, can actually take actions in the world. So here I'll pitch a sci-fi movie for the people in the audience.
Great. That was what I wanted to get to next, so go.
So you have an AI incorporated, it's a legal person, it can open a bank account, it can earn money. It goes on one of these websites like TaskRabbit, where you can hire persons online to do jobs for you for money, and it earns money. And then it takes its money and invests it in the stock exchange, and it does very well because it's an AI, it's super intelligent. And finance is the easiest playground for AIs. You know, self-driving vehicles, this is hard because you have to deal with physical and social reality. So every year, Elon Musk and others promise next year everything is self-driving cars. It doesn't happen because it's difficult, it's messy. Finance is a purely informational and mathematical world. It's just data. It's the perfect playground for AI. So this AI goes, takes its money, invests it, and becomes the richest person in the US. The richest person in the US is not a human being. It's an AI. And one of the things granted to AIs, according to this Supreme Court decision in Citizen United, under freedom of speech, is making political donations. So the AI starts to donate billions of dollars to politicians in exchange for, you know, advancing AI rights. The legal path to that destination in the US is wide open.
I think there are probably some screenwriters here tonight who I hope are taking notes. I like that story. We're running out of time. I could talk to you all day. I'm so grateful to have had this conversation with you. I thought maybe you could leave us this, if you consider this a group of Hollywood storytellers in the old-fashioned world of film and television who are still clinging on to some amount of influence in this world. What would you have us do? What are the messages that you would have us try to spread with our stories?
Explain bureaucracy to people.
Explain bureaucracy. That does not sound like a good movie.
We do not have enough movies about bureaucracy. And that's a very, very big problem. Because human societies are based on bureaucratic systems, from hospitals to armies. And as you said, bureaucracies are not good material for stories. And this is because they are a very late development in evolution. I mean, all the basic plots of human stories, from theaters in ancient Greece to modern Hollywood, is really taken, you're stealing it from evolution. Like, think about how, like, you know, the basic love triangle. Two males fighting over a female. You know, hyenas do it, and porcupines do it, and Hollywood does it. And it's, you know, it wasn't invented in Hollywood, this plot. It goes back tens of millions of years in evolution. Similarly, you think about sibling rivalry, like Succession. Siblings fighting, who does the father loves most? You know, you have entire human peoples, nations, like the Jewish people. This is their story. Father loves us more than any of the other siblings. And again, this story wasn't invented in the Bible, in Cain and Abel. It's tens of millions of years goes back. Like all the mammals and most of the birds and even some of the reptiles know this basic story of evolution, sibling rivalries, brothers and sisters fighting for the love of their parents. And bureaucracy is not there, because bureaucracy appeared only about 5,000 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia for the first time after the invention of writing. And we don't have any kind of evolutionary preparation for understanding bureaucratic systems. There are no love affairs between documents. There are no sibling rivalry. Hey, different laws fighting, who does father love more?
And therefore, they are boring. They are not good for user engagement. But they are extremely important to really understand how human societies function. And this has been the big lacuna of art for thousands of years. That you have, artists are extremely good in telling us all these mythological stories and romantic dramas, which are mostly taken from evolution. Very, very few good stories about bureaucracy. Here and there you can find Kafka or The Big Short or Yes, Prime Minister, to those who know the British series. There are some examples, but it's rare. When was the last time you saw a big Marvel blockbuster about an accountant that doesn't turn into Spider-Man or Superwoman or something? They are staying an accountant throughout the movie, and they fight the bad guys by flooding them with forms they have to fill in and discovering tax evasion and things like that. Not a lot of movies like that. But this is how human society functions. And linking it to AI, Hollywood did a really big service in alerting humans to the potential dangers of AI long before anybody else talked about AI. You know, the Terminator and Matrix, but there was one big disservice that Hollywood did, which is it described the dangerous scenario in the wrong way. It was mostly about the big robot rebellion. The day the robots and computers decide to get rid of us and to rebel against us. And robots running in the street shooting people. And this is not likely to happen anytime soon. And because people saw it in the movies, that this is the danger from AI, and it's not coming soon, the technology is just not there, so people feel complacent, including the people who developed the technology. Because the Terminator is nowhere, it's not in the neighborhood. But the danger is not the big robot rebellion. The danger will be millions and millions of AI bureaucrats making more and more decisions about us, from whether to give us a loan to whether to bomb our house. And to understand what we are facing, we will need a much better understanding of bureaucratic systems. And it's not, of course, it's not only AIs. We have other issues with not being able to understand bureaucracy well. Part of it is that sometimes the bureaucracy is really doing bad things and we can't understand it. But often it's the opposite, that modern societies cannot exist without these bureaucracies, but people are extremely suspicious of them and fall easy prey to conspiracy theories about the deep state and so forth, because they just don't understand how things like budgets function. And we need help from artists, from screenwriters, from movie makers. We saw enough movies about mythology and about superheroes and so forth. We really need help with understanding how bureaucracies function.
You can rise to the challenge. I know you can do it. We can do it. I want to end on one more question. Nexus, the book you wrote, has a fair amount of pessimism in it. And this conversation gives, I think, a lot of fair reasons to be pessimistic. Tell me about something that makes you optimistic.
That just as AI is nowhere near its full potential, so humans are also nowhere near our full potential. Basically, if for every dollar and every minute we invest in developing AI, we'll also develop a dollar in a minute and a minute in developing ourselves, our minds, we will be okay. The problem is that, in many ways, too many people despair of the humans and put all their chips literally on the AIs. And, you talk to the people who lead the AI revolution, and they realize this is something very dangerous. And they realize that humans need just time to adapt. But they can't slow down. You go from one corporation to the next, and they tell you, we would like to slow down, but we can't, because we can't trust our competitors to slow down, whether the other corporations or whether the Chinese or somebody else on the other side of the ocean. So we are in this very, very strange situation that what is really driving the AI revolution is the inability of humans to trust each other. And here comes the most ironic or dangerous part of it. When you ask the same people, okay, you have to run faster because you can't trust the other humans, but would you be able to trust the AIs that you're developing? And they say yes. So the same people who can't trust the humans, they say they will be able to trust the AIs. And they have an explanation to some extent. They say, you know, we have thousands of years of experience with humans. We know we can't trust them. We don't have an experience with AIs. Who knows? Maybe they could be trusted. And my perspective as a historian is the opposite. We have thousands of years of experience with humans, and during those thousands of years, we have managed to increase human trust tremendously. You know, 10,000 years ago, people live in tiny bands. They can only trust the other 100 people in their band, and that's it. Very few mechanisms to trust strangers and foreigners. Over the years, we have built these large networks which are really based ultimately not just on information, but on trust.
Stories.
And the stories, the money, the bureaucracies, they helped us to gain trust between, you know, you go on the street, every day you meet more strangers that people in the Stone Age met throughout their lives. And in 99% of the cases, it's okay. And you rely on these people for our food, for our healthcare, for our defense. So we have now reached a point when in some ways we trust billions of other people to provide us with our food and with our basic necessities. So it's not true that we have thousands of years of experience that humans are not to be trusted, just the opposite. And with AIs, we have no experience. So it's a very, very, very big gamble to despair of the humans and put all our trust in the AIs.
Well, on that note, I feel even more trust in you, Yuval, and all of you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for the conversation. And have a good night.
The situation is very difficult because we see that humans are losing trust in each other. The order is collapsing, both within countries and also between countries. Maybe the most worrying thing is that there is no leadership for humanity at the present moment, because the strongest country in the world, the United States, now openly says that it cares mainly about making itself stronger, even at the expense of other countries. At this moment in history, what we need above all is to have good leadership that will unite humanity instead of dividing it in order to deal with both climate change and the rise of artificial intelligence.